It was a Tuesday evening in the heart of Manhattan, when the city seemed to breathe in rhythm with the neon lights and restless footsteps echoing on the pavement. Inside La Bella, an exclusive restaurant catering to the Upper East Side elite, the air was thick with the perfume of wealth. Truffle oil, aged wine, and the faint metallic tang of polished silverware blended into an intoxicating atmosphere that promised indulgence to those who could afford it. For Emma Torres, it was just another battlefield. At 24, Emma had become a veteran of the service industry. Her uniform fit like armor, her tray balanced as steadily as a soldier's weapon. She was invisible to the world of La Bella, one of the many who ferried plates and poured wine with a smile rehearsed to perfection. But inside, she carried a different identity. Emma was a designer, or at least she believed she was. Tucked in her worn locker was a sketchbook filled with bold lines and delicate patterns inspired by the city. Her dream was Parsons School of Design, the place she was desperate to reach. But every hour she worked here was another step on a path paved with exhaustion and compromise. That night, La Bella glowed brighter than usual. Every table was full, every laugh sharpened by expensive champagne. Emma moved through the crowd precisely, her black shoes barely whispering against the marble floor. Her heart wasn't in the orders she took or the bottles she uncorked. It lived instead in the sketches she had imagined that afternoon. Designs shaped from the chaos of subway maps and the delicate veins of leaves she had picked up in Central Park. Still, reality pressed hard against her ribs. Rent was due in a week. The Parsons fund she had built from tips and double shifts was dwindling quickly. She steadied herself as the host gestured toward her section. Table 9. The reservation was under the name Grant. Emma's eyes caught sight of the man before the host spoke his name aloud. Alexander Grant. His presence cut through the room like a blade. His suit was tailored so perfectly, it seemed to have been sculpted for him alone. And on his wrist glinted a watch that could have covered Emma's rent for a year. His hair was dark, his jawline sharp, and his eyes carried the restless color of a storm rolling in. Beside him, Cassandra Vale leaned back with the poised disdain of someone accustomed to getting her way. Blonde hair fell in perfect waves, her crimson dress a fire slash against the restaurant's muted palette. Emma approached with her best professional smile, but could already feel the tension radiating from their table. Alexander did not acknowledge her greeting, his gaze fixed on his phone, as if she were no more significant than the candle flickering between them. Cassandra smirked into her compact mirror, whispering something to him that Emma could not hear. The dismissal stung, but she steadied her hand on the notepad. "Wine list, sir," she offered, her voice calm though her chest tightened. Alexander lifted his eyes at last, not to meet her face but to scan her apron, posture, and existence in a single impatient flicker. "Just the wine list." His tone was flat, the words clipped. Emma nodded, swallowing the retort that threatened to rise. She had survived worse. She placed the heavy, leather-bound list on the table. He snatched it without so much as a thank you. The book's edge clipped a water glass, spilling liquid into Cassandra's lap. The woman gasped, her face twisting with fury. Emma rushed forward with a napkin, her apologies flowing. Cassandra batted her away as though her touch were an offense. "For God's sake, Alexander," growled your voice low and dangerous. "Can you do nothing right?" Unthinkable hummed on, oblivious to the storm brewing at table 9, but Emma felt the humiliation sink deep. This was not new. The wealthy treated her as furniture and air, and she was treated as less than a human. Still, she forced her hand steady and her voice neutral. She knew her manager would rush in with apologies and complimentary wine. She knew the night would stretch long into dawn. But something different stirred inside her chest. A quiet heat that felt dangerous. Emma momentarily retreated to the service station, her eyes catching her reflection in the brass coffee machine. She saw not the uniform, not the weary servant, but the girl with ink-stained fingers who sketched the city's heartbeat into fabric. She clenched her jaw and returned to the floor. Alexander Grant and Cassandra Vale had no idea that tonight would not unfold as expected. Tonight would ignite a spark that neither wealth nor arrogance could extinguish. The city outside pulsed with indifference, but inside La Vela, in a small corner where a young woman balanced dignity against survival, the first threads of a story were being woven. A story that would shatter both her world and his. The night pressed on, each moment at table 9 weighing heavier than the last. Emma moved back and forth with the discipline of someone who had endured countless humiliations before, yet tonight something was different. Alexander Grant never once offered a glance that acknowledged her as a person. Cassandra Vale leaned into her cruelty as though it were a performance staged for the entire dining room. Every snapped finger, every dismissive smirk chipped away at Emma's restraint. The appetizers arrived. Alexander inspected the plate as though it had been prepared to test his patience. He poked at the food with his fork, muttered under his breath about perfection, and then dismissed it entirely. Cassandra laughed softly, not at the meal, but at the sight of Emma's forced composure. When the wine was poured, Alexander stared so intently that Emma's hands trembled, though she refused to spill a single drop. Still, Cassandra found a flaw. The temperature of the glass, she claimed, was too warm. Alexander echoed her complaint, his sigh slicing through Emma's endurance like a knife. She apologized once more, her words automatic, the kind of language drilled into her through years of service. But behind her polite tone, a storm was gathering. Dessert came last, with it the moment that would tear through Emma's carefully built defenses. Cassandra flipped the dessert menu open, then shut it with deliberate slowness, her eyes sweeping Emma as though she were nothing more than a blemish on the room's luxury. "We will take the tiramisu," Cassandra announced, and then, her voice sharp enough to cut the air, a new waitress. "This one is depressing to look at." The insult landed with the precision of a bullet. Gasps scattered across the nearest tables. A fork clattered against china. Emma froze, the menu still in her hands. Her body caught between the instinct to endure and the urge to reclaim herself. She felt years of double shifts, aching feet, and anonymous smiles for faceless customers condense into this moment. Her dream of Parsons, her endless sketching in the dead of night, the cheap dinners scraped together to save money. All of it burned within her as if demanding release. She straightened, the menu no longer a shield, but a weight she set firmly on the table. The silence stretched, thick and expectant. Cassandra tilted her head in mock impatience. Alexander finally looked up from his phone, annoyance flickering like a storm across his features. "No," Emma said. Not loud, but sharp enough to slice through the entire restaurant's hum. Conversations faltered. Glasses paused mid-air. The story... All eyes turned towards table 9. Alexander narrowed his gaze, disbelief etched into the lines of his face. "No? What do you mean, no?" "I mean exactly what I said," Emma replied, her voice steady, though her heart thundered. "You will not be getting a new server. You will not be getting tiramisu. What you will be getting is the check." Cassandra gasped, clutching her pearls with theatrical outrage. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice dripping venom. "Do you know who you are speaking to?" Alexander leaned forward, his voice dropping to a growl that carried more menace than volume. "Do you know who I am?" Emma met his storm-grey eyes, and for the first time all night, she did not look away. "Yes," she said with a calm that surprised even herself. "I know exactly who you are. You are the man at table 9, the man who snaps his fingers because speaking is beneath him, the man who blames a server for a glass he himself knocked over, the man who wears a $50,000 watch but cannot muster the decency to say please or thank you." The words cut deeper than any raised voice could. Cassandra's painted lips parted in shock. Alexander's jaw tightened, but no retort came. The restaurant was frozen, waiting. The collective breath of the wealthy elite caught in their throats. Emma turned slightly, her gaze shifting to Cassandra. "And you? You think it is clever to mock someone who is trying? That effort you find so depressing is what pays for my education. It is what keeps this city alive, while you hide in your bubble of privilege, mistaking cruelty for wit. Softened, but carried with even more force. Money cannot buy class. It has not bought you kindness, and it has not bought you the right to treat another human being like they are invisible." The silence was electric. Every eye fixed on the young waitress, who had chosen dignity over fear. Emma lifted her chin, her pulse racing, and neatly placed the folded check at the table's edge. "Your evening is over. My manager will accept my resignation." Without waiting for permission or dismissal, she turned and walked away, her footsteps steady on the marble floor. Behind her, Alexander Grant sat speechless for the first time that night, and Cassandra Vale's fury smoldered in silence. The restaurant remained hushed, the weight of Emma's defiance lingering in the air like smoke after a firework. It was the breaking point, when a lifetime of swallowed words finally found their voice. Emma did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing with certainty. She had lost her job, but she had reclaimed herself. And no wealth, arrogance, or power in that room could take that victory away. The rain began when Emma Torres exited La Vela's service entrance. It drizzled in fine needles, soaking into her thin jacket, clinging to her hair until it plastered against her face. She drew in a shaky breath, the adrenaline that had carried her through her outburst draining into a cold hollowness. The marble floors, the shocked faces, the weight of silence inside the restaurant clung to her skin like a second uniform. For the first time in years, she had spoken her truth, and for the first time, she had detonated her future. Powerless. The walk toward the subway station blurred into a haze of neon reflections on wet pavement. Yellow taxis hissed past, splashing water onto her shoes. The glittering storefronts mocked her with their luxury, each displaying a reminder of the chasm between her world and theirs. She had always known she was an outsider here, a ghost among the wealthy, but tonight the truth pressed down like a weight too heavy to bear. Her Parsons fund, her savings from double shifts and careful budgeting, would now be consumed, not by tuition, but by rent. Dreams did not pay bills. Rent notices did. When she reached the fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria, her legs ached and her clothes were damp enough to chill her bones. Lily Chen was waiting in the living room, her textbooks spread across the couch like a barricade of responsibility. She looked up the moment Emma pushed through the door. One glance at Emma's face, she rose, pouring 2 glasses of cheap red wine from the bottle on top of the fridge. "All right, Emma," Lily said quietly, handing her a glass. "Give me the post-mortem. What happened?" Emma collapsed onto the worn sofa, the springs groaning beneath her weight. She told everything in halting sentences. The snapped fingers, the spilled water, the insults, Cassandra's final cutting remark, and then her own explosion of words, raw and searing, unleashed in front of the entire restaurant. Lily listened without interruption, her eyes widening, her expression shifting between horror and pride. "You said all that?" Lily whispered when Emma fell silent to his face. Emma murmured, staring into her wineglass. "And now I am fired. No income, no fund, no Parsons. Just me and my foolish pride." Lily shook her head firmly. "No, you are not foolish, you are a legend. That man sounds like the king of all jerks. He deserved every word." Emma tried to smile, but the weight in her chest was immovable. Pride did not pay for textbooks or sketchpads. Pride did not hold off the landlord. She pulled her sketchbook from her bag, the pages warped from the drizzle, and flipped through the designs that once felt like lifelines. Patterns inspired by subway maps, silk gowns imagined from fractured glass. They now seemed fragile, like children's drawings, dreams mocked by reality. The room was silent except for the refrigerator's hum and the occasional passing siren from the street below. Emma closed the sketchbook and pressed it to her chest. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. She was empty. Across the city, Alexander Grant stood before a window of glass that stretched from floor to ceiling. The skyline of Manhattan glittered like a kingdom laid at his feet, but tonight he felt no triumph. Cassandra had left hours earlier, her parting words cutting him deeper than he admitted. You let a nobody humiliate you. You are losing your edge. Her voice was already fading, but Emma's remained. The waitress's calm defiance replayed repeatedly, her words striking harder than any boardroom insult he had ever endured. All the money in the world cannot buy you class. No one had dared say it before. No one had looked at him and seen through the armor of wealth, the layers of suits, the mask of power. Yet she had. On his desk lay a half-empty glass of Macallan 25. He set it aside, untouched. His thoughts returned to the sketchbook that had fallen from her bag. In that brief accidental moment, he had glimpsed something extraordinary. A design unlike any he had ever seen, intricate and alive, a vision in color and line. He had spent his life investing in potential, finding sparks others overlooked, but never had he seen something like that. It haunted him now as much as her words. Alexander pressed his palm against the cold glass of the window, his reflection staring back at him with tired eyes. He had power, he had wealth, yet he had never felt so hollow. In the space left behind by arrogance, shame took root, and beneath that shame, a strange conviction began to stir. For Emma Torres, the night ended in silence and doubt. For Alexander Grant, it ended in unease and awakening. Two lives had collided in a storm of truth, and though the fallout was devastating, it was only the beginning of a transformation neither of them yet understood. Alexander Grant did not sleep that night. The penthouse high above Central Park glowed faintly with the city's restless light, each window pane capturing fragments of neon headlights and rain. The silence inside was absolute, broken only by the occasional tick of the Patek Philippe on his nightstand. Yet, the quiet did not soothe him. It pressed on him like a weight. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, until he finally rose, poured himself another glass of scotch, and crossed to the window where the city sprawled beneath him like a conquered empire. It should have felt triumphant. For years, this was the life he had carved from nothing. The son of a steel worker from Pittsburgh, he had clawed his way through scholarships and endless hours at a law library, then through the brutal hierarchy of Wall Street. Everything he wore, everything he owned, every inch of power he commanded was self-made. And yet tonight, in the aftermath of a dinner gone wrong, it all felt cheap. He replayed the scene over and over, the way she had stood there, her apron damp from spilled water, her hands trembling but her voice steady, the hush that had swept across La Vela when she said no, the conviction in her eyes when she told him his money could not buy class. No one had ever dared to strip him bare like that. In the boardroom, he was feared. In the press, he was lauded as ruthless. But in a crowded restaurant, a waitress had cut him deeper than any rival could. Cassandra's fury had rolled off him like water. Her insult about weakness, her disdain as she stormed out, none of it lingered. It was Emma's words that refused to let go. He remembered her sketchbook, which slipped from her bag as she walked out. It lay open on the marble for a moment, and in that second he had seen lines that pulsed with life. Sharp geometric edges flowing into soft organic curves, like shattered glass reborn as something luminous. It was a vision. He recognized it because vision was what he built his empire on. The irony gnawed at him. He had spent the last 6 months negotiating a $700 million merger with LVMH, a deal to solidify his firm's dominance. Hours before dinner, the final email had come through. The deal was dead. His temper had been raw, his mood caustic, and he had carried that poison into La Vela. He had destroyed the evening for everyone around him, but most of all for her. He had become the worst version of himself in that restaurant, and she had named it out loud. Alexander set down the glass of scotch untouched. He crossed to his desk, the city's glow washing over the sleek lines of marble and chrome. He opened his laptop and stared at the blank screen, his fingers poised above the keys but unmoving. He did not know her full name, only Emma, and the restaurant where she had worked until hours ago. But he had Michael, his head of security, the man who could find a ghost in a storm. The phone call was brief. Find her. Full name, address, history. Discretion above all. No contact. Within an hour, the reply arrived in his encrypted inbox. Emma Torres, 24, address in Astoria, Queens. The employment record is a start list of service jobs, accepted into Parsons School of Design for the coming fall semester, contingent on funding. Alexander leaned back in his chair, the words burning into him. The fire in her voice made sense now. The effort Cassandra mocked was not empty. It was survival. It was ambition. It was the fight to build something more than a life of carrying trays and smiling through insults. He saw it as clearly as he had ever seen a promising company on the verge of greatness. She was not a charity case. She was an investment. Phosphate. But this was not about returns or percentages. This was about restitution. He had humiliated her, stripped her of her job, maybe even crushed the dream that kept her alive. Words would not fix that. He knew too well that apologies without action were worthless as failed contracts. He picked up the phone again, this time dialing his private banker. His instructions were simple, delivered with the sharp certainty that had once made his reputation. The letter would be drafted by dawn, and the black titanium card would be engraved by morning. It was not a gift, it was a statement. When he finally closed the laptop, the first light of dawn was breaking over Manhattan. The sleepless tycoon stood at the window, watching the city stir awake. For the first time in years, he did not feel like its master. He felt like a student, and the lesson had been delivered not by a rival or a mentor, but by a waitress with fire in her eyes and a sketchbook full of dreams. The morning after felt heavier than any hangover Emma Torres had ever known. She sat at the chipped kitchen table in her Astoria apartment, the weak sunlight filtering through curtains that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and city dust. A half-eaten bowl of cereal sat before her, soggy flakes sinking into pale milk. She had no appetite. Her mind circled the same thoughts. Rent due in a week. No income. The Parsons Fund gutted before it had even mattered. The echoes of last night still vibrated in her chest. Pride had burned hot at the moment, but this morning only the ash remained. She pulled her sketchbook closer, opening to a page where her pencil lines had begun to shape the outline of a dress inspired by fractured subway tiles. But even that felt hollow. What good were sketches when reality demanded bills? What good was art in a city that chewed people like her alive? She closed it again and pressed her forehead against the cover, her shoulders slumping. Belongings. The sharp buzz of the intercom startled her. She froze. Delivery? She had ordered nothing. The buzz came again, insistent. She shuffled to the door and pressed the intercom button. Hello? A crisp voice answered. Package for Emma Torres. Signature required. She hesitated. A mistake, surely. Still, she buzzed the man in, and moments later a knock sounded. She opened the door and found a courier in a tailored black uniform with a silver arrow emblem on the breast. He held a slim envelope of thick, textured stock, black as obsidian. Miss Torres? Yes. Please sign here. Her hand trembled slightly as she scrawled her name on the digital tablet. The courier nodded politely and vanished down the stairwell, his footsteps echoing. Emma shut the door and stared at the envelope. It bore her name in an elegant serif font, but no return address. The weight of it surprised her. Something metallic shifted inside. With careful fingers, she broke the wax seal, a single stylized G pressed into the surface, and slid out the contents. The first was a letter on heavy cream paper. She read once, then again, her breath catching with each line. There is no adequate apology for my behavior. Your assessment of my character was accurate, overdue, and deserved. My actions were inexcusable. Words cannot repair what I damaged, your evening and your employment. I have learned of your acceptance to Parsons. An artist should not be serving tables, they should be creating. Please accept this not as a gift nor an attempt to buy forgiveness, but as an investment in talent that deserves to flourish. Use it to fund your education, use it to build your future, no strings attached. Consider it restitution for a debt I cannot otherwise repay. Sincerely, Alexander Grant. Her hands shook so badly, the letter almost slipped from her grasp. Restitution, investment, talent. She had never expected words from the man who had treated her like furniture only hours earlier. But it was the second item in the envelope that made her knees weaken. A heavy metallic card, anodized black, gleamed in her palm. American Express Centurion. The mythical black card whispered about among servers, a token of unimaginable wealth, and on it, engraved in silver, was her own name, Emma Torres. She sank onto the couch, the letter in one hand, the card in the other. It felt like holding a key to a different universe. A universe of penthouses and private jets, where tuition was a trivial line item. And yet it sat in her small apartment with its peeling paint and humming refrigerator. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. This could solve everything. Tuition, supplies, rent. The Parsons dream would no longer be a fantasy. It was right here, black and heavy in her palm. But almost immediately, shame crawled into the edges of her excitement. This was not earned. This was conscience money, a billionaire's way of cleaning his guilt. Was she meant to accept it and silently thank him for ruining her livelihood? Was her dignity now traded for a titanium card? The door creaked as Lily returned from her hospital shift, her scrubs damp with rain. Emma thrust the card at her, as if it were a live coal. Look at this. Lily blinked, then gasped. No way. Is this real? Oh my God, Emma. This is your ticket. Parsons, everything. Emma shook her head fiercely. No. This is a bribe. This is him buying his way out of guilt. I wanted to earn it, Lily. With my work, my shifts, my designs. This feels dirty. Lily dropped her bag and sat beside her. Listen to me. What is dirty is a system where someone with your talent has to break her back to dream. Reread his letter. He called it an investment. He saw your sketchbook, didn't he? He saw you. Emma pressed the card against her palm, its terrifying and intoxicating weight. Part of her wanted to throw it across the room. Part of her wanted to use it immediately. Instead, she whispered, I cannot accept it. Not like this. Not as a gift.
Then Lily said calmly,
Make it something else. Make it your terms.
Emma stared at the letter again, the words blurring through the tears in her eyes. Investment, talent, future. Her heart pounded with a sudden resolve. If Alexander Grant thought she was worth investing in, she would decide what that meant. She would not be bought. Not ever. She rose from the couch, sat at her small desk and opened her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she drafted, erased, and redrafted the first line of her response. At last, the words came, simple.
Thank you for your letter. Your apology is accepted. I will not take your money as a gift, but we will discuss terms if you consider it an investment.
And Pearl thundered as she pressed send. The black card remained on the desk, glinting under the weak morning light, no longer just a burden, but a challenge. Emma had reclaimed her power again. The next move would be his. The email had been sent with trembling hands, and Emma Torres spent the next hours pacing the length of her apartment, every creak of the floorboards echoing her heartbeat. She half expected silence, half expected a terse refusal. Yet the reply came in less than 10 minutes, as though Alexander Grant had been waiting for it. Your terms are admirable. They are accepted. Friday. Name the place and time. The words blazed across the screen, stark and undeniable. Emma exhaled sharply, her lungs emptying as if she had run a marathon. He had agreed, and not only agreed, but quickly, without resistance. She felt the ground tilt in her favor for the first time since the black card arrived. Photographic. Heyday. She had 2 days to decide where and how this new confrontation would occur. She rejected meeting him in a boardroom or glass tower office. She would not walk into his world. Instead, she chose the daily grind, a modest coffee shop in Astoria, where the chairs wobbled and the espresso was strong enough to keep exhausted students alive through final exams. It was her ground, her neighborhood, and she would not feel small here. The day of the meeting dawned with gray skies, the kind of muted light that blurred the city's edges. Emma arrived 15 minutes early, her nerves buzzing but her resolve unshaken. She wore no uniform this time, only a simple navy blouse and dark jeans, her hair pinned back neatly. Her sketchbook sat in her bag like a talisman, though she did not intend to show it. At precisely 10 o'clock, the door opened and Alexander Grant stepped inside. Gone was the immaculate suit and the watch that had glared like a lighthouse of wealth. Today he wore dark jeans, a gray sweater, and a worn leather jacket that seemed almost ordinary. Yet even in his simplicity, he carried an aura of command. His eyes swept the room until they landed on her, and for a moment she thought she glimpsed hesitation in the storm-colored gaze. "Miss Torres," he greeted, his voice softer than she remembered. "Mr. Grant," she replied, not rising, only gesturing to the seat across from her. "Please, sit." Airborne, folding his tall frame into the small chair, the table between them suddenly too narrow for comfort. For a moment silence lingered, heavy with memory. Then she broke it. "Thank you for meeting me, and for respecting my conditions. Greens usually desist," he answered in his tone. "Only candor." Emma tilted her head toward the counter. "Can I get you a coffee? It is not a $700 bottle of wine, but it works." Foliage smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. "I will get it. What would you like?" "Black, straight." He returned moments later with 2 steaming mugs, but it was not the coffee that caught Emma's eye. He carried a slim black leather portfolio, which he placed carefully on the table. "Based on your email, I asked my legal team to draft a preliminary agreement. Tuition, living expenses, and a repayment plan beginning 1 year after graduation. 10 years to fulfill the debt. Standard interest rate, but negotiable." Emma blinked at the formality. She had expected resistance, or at least patronizing condescension. Instead, he was treating her words as law. She opened the folder. The contract was thorough, meticulous, and undeniably professional. He had taken her seriously. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly, lifting her eyes from the document. And I want the truth, not rehearsed lines. He leaned back, exhaling as though letting go of weight. The letter was the truth, but not the whole of it. That night, I had just lost the biggest deal of my career. $700 million slipping through my fingers. I was furious. I took it out on everyone around me. It is no excuse, but it is context. Then his gaze locked onto hers, steady and unflinching. But the real reason is this. When you walked away, your sketchbook fell. It opened for just a second. I saw a design, black and gold, like shattered glass refracted into beauty. It was genius. I built my life recognizing potential where others missed it, and in that moment, I saw yours. Emma's breath caught. The sketchbook had always been her private world, never meant for strangers, least of all him. Yet here he was, describing her art with reverence. Gim, this is not charity, he continued. This is an investment in someone whose work will change the world. I am doing this because I believe you will succeed, and selfishly because when your brand rises, I want my firm to handle its first public offering. As silent, the contract in her hands no longer felt like a lifeline but a bridge. Slowly, she closed it and met his eyes. She said firmly that the interest rate is too low, her voice regaining its edge. Set it at prime +2. I want this to be a profitable investment for you. Alexander blinked, then laughed softly, not mockingly but with genuine admiration. Then we have a deal, Miss Torres. From her back card on the table. And this, she said evenly, I will keep meticulous records, quarterly reports, every dollar accounted for. Position would expect nothing less, he answered. They shook hands across the small table, his grip warm and firm. It was not a benefactor rescuing the desperate. It was two people entering a pact, equal and unyielding. Emma walked out of the daily grind with her head high, the city air sharper, brighter. She had not surrendered, she had defined the terms, and in doing so, she had transformed the burden into power. Scrawled in New York always carried a strange electricity, and for Emma Torres, it now felt like the city was conspiring to push her forward. The deal with Alexander Grant had been sealed, and the contract was tucked safely into her bag like a protective charm. Yet, it was not just paper and ink that gave her new strength. It was the knowledge that she had defined her path, set her terms, and refused to be bought. That power lingered in her every step as she prepared for the leap she had dreamed about since high school. The campus of Parsons School of Design loomed like a cathedral of possibility. On her first visit, she walked its hallways with cautious awe, her fingers brushing the cool walls as if to confirm it was real. Students bustled past, arms laden with sketchbooks, rolls of fabric, and portfolios. The air was filled with the sound of ambition, the low hum of sewing machines, the rasp of charcoal across paper, the chatter of students critiquing each other's work. These were her people, she thought. For the first time, she was not pretending. The first tuition payment was made with the Black Centurion card. The swipe at the bursar's office beeped with mundane indifference, yet for Emma, it was thunderous. That single sound represented years of sacrifice, late-night shifts, and the words she had hurled across a restaurant floor. She left the office with her receipt folded in her pocket and tears pricking her eyes, for once her dream was not suspended in sketches and imagination. It had entered the real world. Into her classes with a ferocity that startled even her professors. Every assignment was an opportunity to pour out the backlog of ideas that had been simmering in her head for years. She stayed late in the studios, her hands stained with dye and ink, her sketchbooks filling rapidly with designs that fused the grit of Queens with the grandeur of Manhattan. Her professors began to take notice. One of them, Professor Dubois, a sharp-eyed woman renowned for brutal honesty, paused one evening as Emma pinned a half-finished gown to a dress form. "This is not student work," she said. This is professional. Emma's cheeks warmed, but she did not let pride distract her. She remembered the contract she had signed and the reports she owed. Each month, she prepared an itemized list of every expense: purchase, yard of fabric, needle and thread. She sent it to Alexander with the same precision she used in her stitching. His responses were brief at first. Received, thank you, HD. But as the months passed, the replies grew longer. Excellent progress. Your attention to detail is impressive. Then a question. What is the philosophy behind this shattered glass motif you use so often? Emma hesitated before answering, but she wrote paragraphs explaining how the design reflected fragility and strength and mirrored the city's brokenness and beauty. His next reply surprised her. Fascinating. There is an elegance in destruction transformed into order. Architecture is a valuable study alongside your fashion courses. He attached a photograph of a building in Barcelona, its facade fractured into colored shards of glass. She saved the photo in her folder of inspirations. Slowly, what had begun as monthly expense reports shifted into correspondence that felt alive. They still called them reports, a shared joke, but the content was no longer limited to numbers. He asked about her classes, influences, and frustrations with fabric that refused to behave. She asked about his world, not the ruthless contracts, but how he built teams and recognized potential in chaos. She found his answers startlingly thoughtful. Outside the classroom, she lived frugally, splitting rent with Lily and eating cheap noodles when deadlines loomed. But now, every hardship carried a different weight. It was no longer survival. It was an investment. Each sacrifice fed her vision instead of draining her spirit. One crisp October evening, after submitting her second monthly report, Emma walked through Washington Square Park, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. The trees were ablaze with color, the fountain sparkling under city lights. She paused by a bench and sat, flipping through her sketches. For once, she allowed herself to dream without guilt. She saw runways, collections, and a boutique with her name etched in silver above the door. She saw a life that might finally belong to her. Her phone buzzed. A new email had arrived. Received. Your report looks perfect. Are you open to dinner sometime? As an investor, I am curious about the human return on investment. Strictly business, of course. HD. Pilgrim stared at the message for a long moment. Her breath caught between amusement and apprehension. Strictly business. She knew better. But her lips curved into a small smile as she typed her reply. Dinner sounds acceptable, but I chose the place. The city pulsed around her, alive with possibility. The first steps toward Parsons had been taken. But Emma sensed, instinctively, that her journey was no longer confined to the studio or the classroom. Something larger was unfolding. A story neither fabric nor thread could weave. The restaurant Emma chose was not the glittering halls of the Upper East Side, or the cavernous dining rooms where chandeliers sparkled like galaxies. It was a small bistro in the West Village, with exposed brick walls, flickering candles on mismatched tables, and a menu that changed depending on what the chef found fresh at the market that day. She arrived early, her nerves taut but her posture steady. This was not a date, she told herself. This was a meeting, an investor dinner, nothing more. Alexander Grant entered precisely on time. He wore a charcoal jacket over a simple shirt, no tie, his demeanor softened by the absence of corporate armor. He looked almost like a man instead of a headline. When he spotted her, he nodded slightly before approaching the table. "Miss Torres," he said with a polite warmth that surprised her. "Mr. Grant," she returned, evenly, though the corner of her mouth lifted just enough to acknowledge the effort. They ordered without ceremony. Emma chose pasta with roasted vegetables, and Alexander a steak with chimichurri. For the first 10 minutes, the conversation was as businesslike as expected. She walked him through her courses, her professor's critiques, and the sketches she was developing for her midterm project. He listened intently, occasionally jotting a note on his small leather notebook. His questions were not perfunctory when she described the intricacies of screen printing versus digital printing. He leaned forward, asking about the limitations of color saturation and how fabric absorbs dye differently depending on weave. Jailed, the precision of his curiosity disarmed her. This was not the shallow nodding of a man in an enduring conversation.
This was genuine interest. When she hesitated, he gestured with his pen. "Go on. You explain how the process changes when you scale from a sample to a whole garment." His focus was unwavering, as if her words were the only ones that mattered in the room. When their plates arrived, Emma realized the walls she had built around this meeting were already shifting. They ate slowly, conversation drifting from fabric to history, from art movements to architecture. Alexander spoke unexpectedly about Bauhaus design and the philosophy of form following function. Emma countered with her fascination for Art Deco and the interplay of chaos and symmetry. Their ideas collided and intertwined, sparking energy that made the tiny bistro feel electric. It was Emma who first steered the talk toward his world. "What does it feel like to build something from nothing?" she asked. "Not the money, not the power, but the process." He paused, knife hovering over his steak, then set it down. He said slowly that it feels like balancing on a wire stretched over fire. Every step must be calculated, but you fall if you stare too long at the flames. It is exhilarating. It is terrifying. And it never truly ends. She studied him as he spoke, the man she had once reduced to arrogance and cruelty. The arrogance was still there, but beneath it she now saw something else. Drive sharpened into armor. Fear disguised as control. His edges were brittle, not unbreakable. For a moment, she almost pitied him. "And what about you?" he asked suddenly. "What does it feel like to design?" Emma set down her fork and considered. "It feels like translating the world's noise into a language only I can speak. Sometimes it comes out broken. Sometimes it comes out clear as glass. But when it works, it feels like breathing for the first time." That finally was not uncomfortable. It was heavy with understanding. Alexander's storm-gray eyes held hers, steady and contemplative. She felt seen in a way that unsettled her, as though the protective shell she wore had been gently cracked open. The dinner stretched into hours. The plates were cleared, coffee poured, and still they lingered. They laughed once, unexpectedly,
when the waiter dropped a spoon and Alexander quipped that even the best of us falter under pressure. Emma was smiling without restraint, the tension of their first encounter in La Vela dissolving into something unrecognizable. When they finally left, the city had softened into evening shadows, the West Village streets glowing under warm lamplight. They walked together for several blocks, conversations still flowing, until they reached the corner where their paths diverged. Emma extended her hand formally. "Thank you for dinner, Mr. Grant." Jailed. He took it, his grip firm but not overpowering. "Thank you for allowing me to invest in more than numbers." She pulled her hand back, her cheeks warming though the night air was cool. As he turned toward the subway, she glanced once over her shoulder. He stood still beneath the lamppost, watching her disappear into the city's rhythm. The line between business and personal had blurred, not with declarations or grand gestures, but with the simple intimacy of being heard. Emma carried that realization with her as she descended into the subway. The black card was heavy in her bag, but her spirit was unexpectedly light. Something had shifted, and she could not yet name it. By November, the rhythm of Emma's new life had settled into something almost natural. Classes consumed days and late nights in the design studios, her hands stained with ink and fabric dye. Evenings brought her back to the small apartment in Astoria, where she and Lily laughed over cheap takeout and talked about futures that no longer felt like fantasies. Yet woven through the routine was an unexpected thread, her growing connection to Alexander Grant. Their so-called investor meetings had become a regular occurrence, at first monthly, then bi-weekly, and finally slipping into something more frequent without naming it. They met in coffee shops, quiet restaurants, and even once in the small library near campus, where Alexander listened as she explained the research behind her design motifs. What began as financial oversight shifted into something personal. They challenged each other, argued passionately, and laughed in surprising ways. Emma found herself drawn to the contradictions he carried. He was powerful yet restless, polished yet haunted. He confessed that he had grown up in a Pittsburgh steel town, the son of a man whose hands were permanently scarred by work. His arrogance, Emma realized, was not the effortless entitlement of inherited wealth, but the brittle armor of someone who had clawed his way upward and feared the fall. In return, she shared pieces of her story, of nights waitressing to set pennies and sketchbooks filled by candlelight when electricity had been cut off. Slowly, a trust grew between them. One evening, after an exceptionally long day at Parsons, Emma met Alexander in Washington Square Park. The air was sharp with the bite of early winter. The fountain sprayed mist that glistened under the streetlights. They walked together along the curved paths, their conversation quieter than usual, their steps synchronized. When they stopped under the glow of a lamppost, Alexander turned toward her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. He said quietly that these hours with you are the best investments I have ever made. Ecompan's heart hammered as she tried to summon a reply. Her usual defenses faltered. When he leaned in, the kiss was not a claim or a command, but a question. She answered without hesitation, the city falling away around them. It was a slow burn, a connection born from respect and sharpened by chemistry, and it shifted the foundation beneath both of them. For weeks afterwards, their relationship deepened in secret. Alexander became her fiercest supporter, appearing at her student showcases with a quiet pride that radiated through the crowded rooms. Emma, in turn, became his confidant, the one person he trusted to see past the armor. Yet both knew the precarious balance they maintained. He was still Alexander Grant, a man whose name carried weight in boardrooms and gossip columns. She was still Emma Torres, a student fighting to carve her name in fabric and thread. Their worlds did not align easily. The fracture arrived sooner than either expected. Emma felt a newfound confidence at a gallery opening in Chelsea, where Alexander had invited her to accompany him. She wore a dress of her own design, sleek black silk with a fractured glass pattern stitched across the bodice.
She was discussing postmodernism with a curator when a familiar voice, sharp and cold, cut through the room.
Well, well, I see you have taken to rescuing strays, Alexander. How philanthropic! Emma turned to find Cassandra Vale standing behind her, champagne flute in hand, eyes glittering with malice. The insult dripped with the same venom she had wielded at La Vela. Her gaze shifted between Alexander's hand resting on the small of Emma's back and Emma's dress. "The little waitress with the big mouth," Cassandra said with a cruel smile. "You have found a much more effective way to get what you want. Tell me, is he paying for the dress too, or is that part of the tuition package?" Exed like a blade, designed to unravel everything Emma had built. She felt the sting of being dragged back into that restaurant for a split second, reduced to nothing but a server, mocked for existing. But then she steadied herself. She straightened her spine, her eyes calm and unyielding.
"Yes, Cassandra," she replied smoothly. "He is. It is all part of the investment. Alexander only backs ventures with high potential returns. You should know what it is like to be on the losing end of his deals." The jab landed. Cassandra's expression tightened, her smirk faltering. She recovered quickly, but the damage was done. She set down her glass with unnecessary force and stalked away, her perfume trailing like smoke. Amma, fury flashing in his eyes. "I am sorry," he said, his voice low. "I should not have exposed you to that." Disregard gently. "Do not apologize. I am not made of glass." She was right about one thing, though. You did invest in me, and I intend to make you look like a genius. Still, Emma knew that Cassandra Vale was not finished. The venom in her eyes had not been extinguished, only sharpened. Trouble was brewing, whispers of complication already coiling in the air. And though Emma walked away from the gallery with a red eye, she felt the first tremors of a storm gathering on the horizon. The storm arrived with the quiet cruelty of a whisper. 2 days before the prestigious Parsons end-of-year showcase, Emma Torres awoke to a string of frantic messages lighting up her phone. At first, she thought it was excitement from her classmates, nerves before the runway, but the tone of the text shifted quickly. "Have you seen this? Emma, what did you do? Is it true?" Her stomach sank. She opened the link one of them had sent and froze. The headline screamed across the screen. "Parsons prodigy or prolific plagiarist?" Beneath it, 2 photographs side by side. On the left, a cheap polyester dress is being sold on a fast fashion website. On the right, one of Emma's sketches, lifted straight from her private Parsons archive. The resemblance was undeniable. The crude knockoff dress bore a fractured glass pattern that looked hauntingly similar to the motif Emma had spent months perfecting. The article implied betrayal. Either she had stolen her design from the bargain bin brand, or, worse, she had sold her sketch to them for quick money before her debut. The accusations spread like wildfire, comments poured in, branding her a fraud. By the time she arrived on campus, whispers chased her down hallways. Professors averted their eyes. Classmates exchanged glances heavy with doubt. Wilmington fears crystallized when Professor Dubois called her into the office. Emma began gently, saying that the university has to protect its integrity. "We are placing your gown under review. It will not appear in the showcase until the Honor Code Committee resolves this." Emma felt the floor give way beneath her. The dress she had stitched bead by bead, representing her entire year, was stripped. That night, she sat at the small kitchen table in Astoria, her phone buzzing relentlessly with messages she could not bear to answer. Lily Chen hovered nearby,
trying to console her, but Emma's eyes were hollow. "It was Cassandra," she whispered at last. "I know it was her. Who else would hate me enough to destroy me this way?" When she finally called Alexander, her voice trembled. She explained the accusations, the article, and the removal from the showcase. A silence stretched across the line. In that dreadful pause, a new fear coiled in her chest. What if he doubted her too? What if all he saw was a foolish waitress who had reached too high? Alexander's voice broke the silence, low and controlled, carrying a current of fury. "I am booking a flight, 7 hours. Please do not talk to anyone until I get there. We are going to fight this." Blackmail's tears fell then, not from despair, but from the relief that he believed her. Yet she knew she could not simply wait for rescue. This was her name, her design, her future. She gathered her sketchbooks, laptop, and phone filled with photos. She assembled a timeline of her process, from the first charcoal doodles to the digital Illustrator files with her timestamp metadata. She pulled out pictures of dye staining her hands, beads spread across her work table, and the gown slowly taking form. Proof, not just that the design was hers, but that it had been born from her hands and heart. When Alexander arrived, disheveled from the transatlantic flight, he found her surrounded by piles of evidence. Her eyes were red but steady. She confessed that, "I was so afraid you would doubt me," as he embraced her. "Doubt you?" he said firmly. "Never. I invested in your character before your career. The only question in my mind is who I have to destroy." He mobilized quickly, his own world of resources snapping into place. Michael, his head of security, dug into financial records, tracing the fast fashion company back to a shadowy shell corporation. Digital forensic experts were tasked with tracking the leak of Emma's sketches from the Parsons system. The instructions were simple and merciless. Find the connection. Find the traitor. Meanwhile, Emma prepared her defense. She filed for a formal honor code hearing, determined to face the committee as a victim and fighter. She assembled her work into a dossier that read like a chronicle of creation. Each sketch, each edit, and each fabric sample carried a date, a progression, and a story that could not be faked. Negligence, she walked into the small wood-paneled room with Alexander seated silently behind her. The committee watched as she laid out her journey piece by piece. "This was not stolen," she declared, her voice unwavering. "This was grown. What you saw online is an echo. Mine is the original voice." The committee members exchanged glances, visibly moved. And even as they deliberated, Alexander's phone buzzed with the message from Michael. The evidence was in. Cassandra Vale's investment firm funded the fast fashion company. The leak traced back to a student who had been paid off, and the IP address of the anonymous tip matched Cassandra's hotel suite in Paris. Emma left the hearing that day still uncertain, but something in her chest had shifted. She had fought back, with proof, with dignity, with unshakable resolve. The sabotage had unfolded, but the battle was not over, and for the first time since the scandal broke, she felt the tide begin to turn. The hours following the honor code hearing stretched like an eternity. Emma Torres returned to her apartment, the city outside buzzing with its usual indifference, but inside she felt suspended between hope and ruin. Her evidence had been strong, her voice clear, yet the sting of public accusation clung to her like a second skin. The article still burned online, shared across gossip sites and fashion blogs, each headline branding her a plagiarist. She sat at her desk, staring at her phone, refreshing the page until Lily Chen gently pulled it from her hands. "Stop," Lily urged. "You show them the truth. Let it breathe." But Emma could not silence the storm inside her. She thought of the runway, the gown hanging untouched in the Parsons studio, her masterpiece condemned to the shadows while others strutted under the lights. Rage simmered beneath her exhaustion. She had fought too long, endured too much to be erased now. That evening, Alexander arrived at her apartment, carrying the weight of sleeplessness in his eyes. Since leaving the hearing, he had been on calls, his networks buzzing like a hive steered into fury. When Emma opened the door, he stepped forward and wrapped her in his arms, the embrace fierce, grounding. She admitted in a whisper, "I was terrified. You would doubt me."
He pulled back to look her in the eyes. "Emma, I never doubted you. I invested in your character long before your career. My only thought has been who to destroy for this." His words were steel, but Emma shook her head. "Proof is the battlefield, not vengeance. If I win, it must be with evidence, not force." He nodded slowly, though his eyes still burned with a hunger for justice. "Very well, but know this, I will not let her win." For days they fought on twin fronts. Emma compiled every scrap of her process, refining her dossier until it was unassailable. Sketches dated months apart, digital files with timestamps, photographs of her working through the nights, threads and swatches pinned like artifacts. She rehearsed her defense not as a plea but as a lecture, determined to show that design was not theft but growth, not imitation but originality carved from lived experience. Meanwhile, Alexander unleashed his world. Michael traced the money trail deeper, uncovering how Cassandra Vale had funneled funds into a shell company that conveniently owned the fast fashion site. Forensic experts uncovered digital footprints leading back to Cassandra's Paris hotel suite, where the leak had originated. A disgruntled Parsons student, bribed for access to the digital archives, confessed under questioning. The scheme was precise, methodical, and malicious. Cassandra had tried to destroy Emma's credibility and orchestrated a spectacle designed to leave her humiliated before she could even step onto the runway. The committee reconvened 2 days later. Emma walked into the chamber with her portfolio clutched to her chest. Alexander, a silent sentinel at her back. She laid out her case with precision, guiding the professors through her journey step by step. Here was the first charcoal sketch, dated in the corner. Here was the digital evolution, each file tagged by month. Here were the photos. Dye-stained hands working over silk, beads glinting under a desk lamp. The design had not been stolen, she told them. It had grown, like a seed nourished through struggling to bloom. When she finished, silence filled the room. The committee murmured among themselves, their eyes betraying a shift from doubt to belief. As Emma waited, Alexander's phone vibrated. He glanced down, then his expression hardened into something close to triumph. Michael had delivered the final proof. A complete map of Cassandra's plot, from the bribe to the blog post, tied with irrefutable evidence. Within 24 hours, the tide turned. The committee issued a complete exoneration, publicly declaring Emma innocent of all accusations. The gossip blog, faced with lawsuits and the evidence of its manipulation, printed a groveling retraction. Vogue ran a piece not on scandal, but resilience, celebrating Emma Torres as a designer whose integrity matched her vision. Cassandra's world crumbled overnight. Investors pulled out of her firm, whispers of her downfall spreading through the same circles she had once ruled, but vindication alone was not enough. On the night of the Parsons showcase, Madame Dubois made an unprecedented announcement. One final piece remained unlisted in the program, a surprise addition. The lights dimmed, the runway fell silent, and a single model emerged, wearing Emma's gown. The shattered glass pattern glimmered beneath the spotlights, each bead catching light like constellations stitched into fabric.
The audience gasped, the room erupting into thunderous applause. At the runway's end, Emma stepped out, trembling but proud. She met Alexander's gaze in the crowd, his expression a mixture of pride and something deeper, something that stole her breath. The ovation washed over her like a tide, not of pity, but of recognition. She had survived the fire, and from it she had emerged unbroken.
For Emma Torres, the trial of fire had not destroyed her. It had forged her. The night of the Parsons showcase lived in Emma Torres's memory like a dream she could touch. The thunderous applause, the blinding lights, the way her gown shimmered like a constellation beneath the spotlights, these were not illusions. They were proof, living proof, that her art belonged on that stage. She stood breathless at the runway's edge and locked eyes with Alexander Grant. In his gaze, she did not see the ruthless tycoon who had once treated her like furniture. She saw pride, reverence, and something softer still, something that frightened her with its tenderness. The days that followed carried a momentum she could barely keep pace with. Editors from major fashion houses requested meetings, buyers wanted to see her sketches, articles spoke of resilience, of a young designer who had weathered sabotage and emerged not broken but radiant. For Emma, the whirlwind was surreal. Yet, in the quiet hours, she felt the gravity of everything that had led here. The humiliation at La Vela, the black card pressed into her trembling hands, the negotiation that had turned charity into partnership. Each step had forged the woman who now walked through doors once barred to her. Months later, on a bright morning in Soho, Emma stood before a boutique whose name glimmered in elegant script above the door. Torres. Just that. Her name. Unadorned, unapologetic. She had chosen simplicity because her work spoke loudly enough. The windows displayed her designs, gowns draped on mannequins like living sculptures, fragments of her journey crystallized into fabric and thread. Inside the boutique, sunlight pooled across polished floors, illuminating racks of her creations. The smell of fresh paint mingled with the faint scent of silk and leather. Alexander was beside her, his hand steady around hers. For once he was silent, with no deal to close and no empire to manage. He looked at the sign, then at her, his expression unguarded. He said, softly, "That night at La Vela was the best deal I ever lost." Emma laughed, a sound bright and free. "For me," she replied, "it was the night I discovered my own worth." The boutique filled quickly with friends, students, professors, and industry figures. Madame Dubois stood near the entrance, her sharp eyes misted with something Emma had never expected: pride. Lily moved through the crowd like a protective older sister, introducing herself to anyone who dared linger too long over a glass of champagne. And Alexander, ever the investor, slipped seamlessly into the role of supporter, allowing the spotlight to remain solely on Emma. Yet Emma knew this was not an ending. The boutique was a beginning, a platform she would launch into an unwritten future. The black card had opened the door, but her will, art, and refusal to bow had built the world on the other side. She thought of the sabotage, Cassandra's venomous smile, and the whispers that once branded her a fraud. All of it had become kindling for a fire. She had not been consumed, she had burned brighter. Grang, later that evening, when the crowd had thinned and the boutique fell into a hushed glow, Emma walked the aisles alone. Her fingertips brushed the gowns, each piece a fragment of her story. She paused before the centerpiece, a reimagined version of her shattered glass gown, this time in luminous silver or midnight blue. It caught the light with every movement, reflecting like stars. She whispered to herself, "This is mine." Alexander joined her, his presence quiet but undeniable. "You built this," he said.
No card, no contract, no deal, just you. Emma turned toward him, her smile steady. Maybe, but you reminded me that I was worth the fight. That matters. While lived her for a long moment, then nodded. Then we invested in each other.
Near outside the city, Pulso with its endless rhythm, cabs honking, neon flashing, people rushing to their own stories. Emma looked out the boutique window and saw not an indifferent city mocking her struggle, but a canvas waiting for her to leave her mark. She had arrived not at the end of a fairy tale, but at the threshold of a far greater journey. Her story, woven with defiance, dignity, and desire, had just begun. And as she stood in the glow of her name etched in light, Emma Torres knew one truth. True wealth was never found in titanium cards or marble penthouses. True wealth lived in spirit, integrity, and the unshakable courage to believe in your talent, even when the world tried to silence it.